If you're passionate about classical education and you're looking for the next step, Hillsdale College's Diana Davis Spencer Graduate School of Classical Education is now offering 2 master's degree programs. These programs provide students with a broad philosophical, historical, literary, and pedagogical perspective on classical education. The Master of Arts in Classical Education is a 2-year in-person program on Hillsdale's campus in Michigan, while the Master of Classical Education Leadership is a 3-year hybrid program with a 1-week summer class held at Hillsdale College. Whether you're interested in teaching, administration, or another area within the field of classical education, we're prepared to offer you a foundational, time-proven approach to your studies. We want to see your application soon. Applications must be submitted on or before December 15th, 2024 for full consideration. To learn more and submit your application, visit classicalgrad.hillsdale.edu. That's classicalgrad.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Cassie Crosby. She is Director of Fine Arts at St. John's Classical Academy, Fleming Island, Florida. Cassie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott.
As we begin, and we'll talk about teaching virtue through music, tell us first about what you do at St. John's and maybe a bit about the school itself.
Okay. Well, I'm in a new position as the Director of Fine Arts, but I've currently served as the Chair of the Fine Arts and Phys Ed Department. And I guess my ultimate job is just to help my teammates as we build our fine arts program and expand it, since our school is now all the way to K-12 and we want to offer as many options as we can. I teach music and I teach musical theater as my course responsibilities. And I really love those things. That's my dream job.
That's fantastic. Talking today about virtue through music, how does music education in a classical setting, how is it different from that of, say, progressive education or other educational settings?
I'd say fundamentally, most music teachers are doing the same things. We're teaching elements, we're teaching about instruments, we're teaching reading music. The biggest differences, I think, in classical education are the how we teach and the why, because in classical education, music is not considered something extra or something fun that's just an after school or an addition to their education. It's considered equal, and we refer to them as co-curriculars instead of progressive terms you might have heard, resource or specials, things of that nature. The other differences, I would say, are the extreme emphasis that's placed on the instruction in the music history, and also the quality of the music that we ensure our scholars are immersed in. There's no musical fluff. We don't use gimmicky hooks, pop music. You're not going to hear a classical teacher rapping just for the
well,
purpose.
Maybe outside the classroom. You never know.
Maybe, but not for the purposes of just trying to grab the attention of our scholars. I would say definitely music is fun, but the enjoyment that our scholars get from participating in music is a byproduct of the virtue development and just learning to love the beautiful.
Can you take us inside your program a bit at St. John's as Director of Fine Arts? What does it look like? What are the expectations for your students, and what are the expectations for your fellow teachers?
Let's see. I would say the biggest difference I noticed with the school in general when I came on board, I taught for 14 years in traditional public school, was that the expectations in general at the school were much higher than what I was used to. And so that was an adjustment as a teacher. But in exploring those expectations, I found that the scholars I was working with were much more capable in the music field than I had ever thought before. And so the first year was really an experiment. Another music colleague came on board at the same time, and I was teaching grammar school music, and she was teaching grammar school piano class. And so we figured it out together. But what we realized is that we can do much more than we originally thought. And so we just pushed the boundaries to see what was possible. And by the end of the first year, the kindergartners were able to do oral identification of intervals, and our kids were reading music, they were sight reading. And so I think that's the basis of what we try to do on our team. We try to be cohesive in our strategy so that as the scholars grow from the grammar school to the upper school in our music program, they will encounter the same teaching philosophies, the same methods. For example, we all count rhythms the same way so that they encounter our personalities, but they know what the expectations are, and they're familiar with what to do so we can move beyond what to the hows and the whys.
How do you instill in your students the confidence to succeed in fine arts? So you found they're kind of much more capable of doing things than perhaps you thought, and maybe now perhaps what they thought too. So how do you give them that confidence to shine?
I think the biggest thing I've learned is that when you model musicianship, as any musician knows, we're not perfect. And so I try to always acknowledge when I have made a mistake. And I think that helps the scholars to feel like it's okay. It's a learning environment and we're all trying something new together, and maybe we're unfamiliar or maybe we feel uncomfortable. A lot of times, with singing, scholars don't want to be heard because they're not comfortable with the way their own voice sounds. But when we just make an environment that's welcoming and friendly and we're learning together, it sort of takes a lot of that off the table. And the ones who are still hesitant see the others enjoying and becoming more comfortable. And little by little, we move them along and bring them into the fold.
Is that a little tougher the older
Yes.
the scholar?
The middle school age.
Yeah. It's kind of yes, we've all seen pageants, and I've noticed this trend. It's like a bell curve, right? They're hesitant at a very young age. By those kind of middle school years, there's some enthusiasm. And then when you get older, maybe it drops off a bit too.
Yes, I think the biggest issue I've run into with the 5th and 6th grade, particularly the boys, is, the vocal changes. And that was a learning experience as well. We kind of had to work around that and figure out what can we do to not make the boys feel like they're sticking out and uncomfortable. For me, it works because I don't take the best care of my own vocal instrument since I'm an instrumentalist by trade. And so my voice makes weird squeaky sounds or it disappears from my body all the time. And I think that helped the boys to feel like they didn't stick out quite as much when we're singing.
Talking to Cassie Crosby, who's Director of Fine Art at St. John's Classical Academy, Fleming Island, Florida. Why is music education so important in the classical tradition?
Well, in classical education, as you know, we're concerned not only with the minds of our scholars, but more so with the hearts. And as we're guiding children to discern truth, goodness, and beauty, we really must look back to the ancient minds to really understand why music is so important. And today, we don't see it as something that's intricate to a child's education or just the emphasis that needs to be there. It's just this extra thing if the school can afford it. But really, if you look back to what, Aristotle and Plato and some of those really great thinkers from antiquity said about it, music is the ultimate discipline with which to learn how to recognize and in turn form your heart toward the goodness and the truth and the beauty. If I may quote one of them, Plato said, "Music is a more potent instrument than any other for education because rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul." And he goes on to talk about music as a moral law. That's an interesting concept for people who are not familiar with it. Similarly, Aristotle said, "Music has the power of producing a certain effect on the moral character of the soul. And if it has the power to do this, it is clear that the young must be directed to music and must be educated in that." And why is that? Well, because music is one of the most beautiful things. And to me, I always tell my scholars, music is a living window to the past, even more so than artwork, because when we look at artwork from the past, we look at it, we study it, and we see the beauty. But with music, we actually can recreate what the masterful composers left for us due to the ability to read notation. And so I think you don't really tell them about the virtue. I think what they do is experience it for themselves. And they get those goosebump moments eventually and start to see how that helps them to develop a sense of what is good and what is true and what is beautiful.
So how can a music teacher in a classical school align their teaching, their music program with that degree of importance that you just discussed?
I spent a lot of time thinking about this summer, and I changed my thoughts on this several times because more so what it was a reflective process. How am I doing this? How are my colleagues doing this? How are teachers that I've spoken with from other classical schools doing it? And I came up with 5 main points that I think summarize sort of the overall picture. Because really in music, any musician knows that we're teaching virtue, knows that we're teaching beauty. But I think half the battle is recognizing all of those teachable moments and then calling attention to them for your scholars. So I think the most important thing, and it may be different for a music teacher coming from a different type of setting, is to consider yourself a history teacher. At least in my experience, music history wasn't much a part of my job in my former school. It was something I maybe dangled here and there, but we teach from the lens of history. And so it's important to study those composers that you're teaching and get so familiar with them that you're off book and can enliven the stories and tell them to your scholars, because it goes hand in hand with my next point, that music is also a way to ignite the moral imagination. We often talk about the moral imagination through literature, and many may have heard Dr. Copeland speak on the same topic, but when you think about it, we're all storytellers. And so when we get the scholars excited about the music that we're listening to or the interesting tale of a composer's life, we're drawing on background knowledge that they have from literature, but we're really forcing them to think from a perspective of, is this moral? Why is it not? And it gives them real characters that they can apply what they've been learning through literature to those conversations.
This is so interesting. I had not considered. We've talked a lot about moral imagination and the creation of it in students on various shows that we've done here. But thinking about that in the scope of music, because all of those pieces are telling a story.
They are.
Storytelling is so powerful. What is the composer thinking? What is he trying to convey? And when you combine that with the ability to both passively and actively listen to the actual piece of music and get those goosebump moments and feel the emotion that is being conveyed, that is a real building block to the creation of moral imagination.
It really is. And I've sort of approached it a different way. For example, in the 3rd grade curriculum, the scholars learn about The Planet Suite by Gustav Holst. And as we're working through that this year, I tried a new thing where, yes, I want them to be able to listen to the music uninterrupted, but I narrated over the top of the music certain movements as we were listening as a class. And I'm fairly animated myself, so there was a lot of moving around and acting it out. I also teach theater. Did I mention that? But as we were doing that, the scholars were able to hear the music at the same time as they're hearing what I'm thinking. And then I turned it around on them, and I had some of them narrate their thoughts about what the story could be, because there's value in the scholar's interpretation of the music as well as what the composer was actually thinking. And I think that's how they begin to take ownership of beauty, because they can narrate that story and come up with it and make connections from all across the curriculum into this one beautiful thing that we're listening to together. It's a shared experience.
All right, you've got 3 more points.
I do. I feel that quality performance is a very important part of a comprehensive music education. But notice I said quality, not performance just for the sake of throwing together something cute, for the kids just to say that they did a performance. And I think in classical education, we have maybe a unique ability to do that due to the curriculum that Hillsdale provides for us, that gives us the guideline that not only incorporates songs that we teach our scholars, but also gives us a framework for choosing additional repertoire to make sure that we're giving them, it's like your child. You don't want to feed them junk. We don't want to feed them musical junk either. We want them to know that they're capable. And if I can share just a little anecdote with you, my colleague that I mentioned earlier, we worked together with the grammar school scholars, and we determined that we were going to do something that many would say is probably insane as a music teacher. And in fact, we hired another colleague who was asked about this exact experience, and he said, "Oh, there's no way, that's much too hard." And then our headmaster said, "Well, our teachers did it." It's kind of a joke around our school. And anyway, it started with our headmaster sharing that the Hallelujah Chorus was his absolute favorite thing to hear during the Christmas holiday. And so we sort of concocted a plan that we were going to secretly prepare our kindergarten through third grade scholars to sing the Hallelujah Chorus as the finale at this Traditions of Christmas event that we do every year. And somehow we managed to keep it a secret. We pulled our hair out quite a bit. We found a simplified 2-part arrangement, and we taught it to our kindergarten through third grade scholars. And somehow that connection of something that is very difficult to do as a musician, even in a simplified version, especially with children that small. And by no means was it perfect. But the shared experience at the end of that concert with those little tiny people, and there were probably 350 of them singing together in a large, beautiful church, and the audience standing, and the parents crying, and the teachers reacting to it, because we just shared this little piece of history together. And that's what I call quality performance. Not a perfect performance, but one where the kids are going to remember it for the rest of their lives. And so will the teachers and everyone present, because it's a touch of history and it's a touch of the future as well.
Yeah.
I also think, and my last 2 points go together, building musical community in your school and your department, and modeling mature musicianship. As I talked about with some colleagues earlier this week, I don't know that there is a better way to learn citizenship and responsibility and all of the virtues we talk about in our schools other than participating in a music ensemble or in a family of musicians, because you are held accountable. Your individual part makes a big difference to the whole, to the success of the group. And the camaraderie that's formed, again, in a shared experience with beautiful quality music and repertoire, it just creates a sense of musical community. And we've taken it a step further at SJCA in that one of our music department, and really fine arts in general, is to incorporate our older scholars who have more experience and more knowledge with our grammar school music and art and musical theater and all of those things. And so we look for opportunities to use them as leaders, use them as mentors. Performances as well. We do a big Constitution Day celebration at our school. And so for the last 2 years, we have taken all of our choir scholars from 2nd to 12th grade and our band, and they rehearse together and they perform together. The Armed Forces Salute and the National Anthem. And just, again, it's those moments that create so much goodness and so much camaraderie. We also recently did a performance of Mary Poppins Jr. with our grammar school musical theater troupe. And we used upper school scholars to be the tech crew for that performance, from a student director to the lighting to the backstage, and watching those interactions between teenagers and very young children at our school. It speaks to the virtue that we teach, first of all, because you wouldn't often trust a bunch of teenagers with little children. But it was so amazing. Another goosebump moment, really. And it takes some of the responsibility off of us as the teachers and shifts it onto the teenagers, who then develop leadership through our music program. But I think the best moment was this year when we did a fine arts showcase and allowed the ensembles to perform for the rest of the upper school student body. We just asked a member of each ensemble off cuff to speak to their peers about, what we do. And all 3 of them that we asked to speak spoke about the community and the camaraderie that is created. We're really just a family of musicians. And I think that is a beacon for school culture across the board, because it sets a precedence of respect and friendship and, striving for the greater good together. So we were really proud of them because we didn't know what they were going to say.
Sure. There's a newly created Hillsdale K-5 songbook. How will that help teachers in their endeavors to cultivate virtue and open students and scholars' eyes to truth, goodness, beauty?
It's a long-awaited and much-needed resource. I was honored to actually be able to unveil it this week for the other music teachers because Mr. Punt, our master teacher, was unavailable at the time. And so a committee of us got together to work on it because it's something that's just needed. There are, I can't even tell you exactly how many songs in the program guide that are related to content across the curriculum, folk songs, American history, places around the world, just other things, and they're so important. But to this point, the teacher has always sort of had to go searching for arrangement or the correct appropriate lyrics to teach, because with folk songs, there are many different varieties of the lyrics.
Right.
And so what it's done is put all of those resources together into one place where it can be found on the K-12 library right now. And you can print what you need, make your own copy of it to annotate in your lesson planning, which frees you up then. That was very time consuming, especially coming on board, being new to classical education. And you don't have to try to create your own resources. It's there for you. So you can spend more time actually teaching. You can spend more time planning. You can spend more time developing pedagogically. So I think it's going to be great. And I'm looking forward to how it will be used in the coming year, hearing from colleagues.
And next time we can talk about that,
Yes.
how it's being used. Cassie Crosby is Director of Fine Arts at St. John's Classical Academy, Fleming Island, Florida. Cassie, thank you so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K-12. That's Hillsdale_K-12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.